Okay, let me run through this parable again and see if we understand it and picture yourself within it. There's a landowner, someone who is pretty substantial, very successful. We'd have to assume he's a somebody in the area. You know, if you owned a vineyard in those days, you were probably in the top 1% in terms of economic earnings in that whole country. Remember, in Israel, it wasn't a matter of being poor, it was a degrees of poverty. So you have somebody who is very substantial, and he has a vineyard that needs to be cared for. And you know that's not easy work. If you're picking the grapes or hoeing the weeds, you move up and down the rocky soil, and the heat of the Israeli, or heat of the desert in some cases, that part of the world. And so he goes to the marketplace, and there are people waiting to be employed, and he picks several of them. We don't know exactly why. He picks several of them, 7 in the morning, and they go to work. They work for a while. He doesn't have enough people, so he goes back to the marketplace at 9 o'clock, takes a few more, doesn't have enough. There's still more work to do, goes back and takes some at 12 o'clock, and then it says at 3 o'clock. And at the end of the day, he still has some work to do, so he goes back and he takes some people at 5 o'clock to finish out the day. And then when it is time to be paid, they all queue up, they all get in line, and he pays them their denarius, or silver coin. And the ones who started at 7 o'clock got paid exactly the same as the ones who started work at 5 o'clock. And the ones at 7 o'clock that started working at 7 a.m. said to him, well, you know what, that's not really fair. Now here's my question. When you hear that story, when you listen to it, when you step into it to experience it, which one of those people do you see yourself as? Do you see yourself as the person who came at 7 a.m. and worked hard and labored and played by the rules and earned everything and should get what you deserve? Or do you see yourself as the person who came at 5 o'clock and really got a break? Or do you see yourself as the one who employs all these folks? I guess not. Who do you see yourself as? I am willing to bet that given this crowd, what I know, this group of people, you are more than likely to have seen yourself as the 7 a.m. people. Do I hear an amen or not? I read that. That's what I had. You know, I worked hard for what I got. I labored. Somebody gave me a break. I took advantage of it. I studied late when I could have been having a lot more fun in college. You know, I think that's where we see ourselves. And, you know, it's just not right that these Johnny-come-latelys get the same as me. You know, I feel what? I feel cheated. You know, how fair is it? I worked 12 hours, they worked 1 hour, and we received the same. You know, in today's world, I'd be tweeting that right away. I'd be lining up to boycott that vineyard, and we would be picketing all the way around. That's what we'd be doing. But I want you to ponder this. Why is it that when we hear this, those are the people we identify with? That's the real question here. Why? It's not even a question. That's who we jump to see ourselves as. Those who have worked long and hard to earn what we have, and as such, we deserve all that we have gotten. And friends, I don't wish to diminish the fruits of a good work ethic and the rewards of being the first in line to take advantage of an opportunity. But I have to tell you, the longer I live, I see how often luck and change have been involved in my journey. And I think it's pretty presumptuous to think otherwise. I think of all the times in my life when I simply met the right person who opened the right doors. Or I was at the right place at the right time and had some good luck. After all, isn't it better to be lucky than good? We say that all the time. It's better to be lucky than good. Simply born in the right country, in the right age, to the right family. But don't forget, when you got a good break in life, when I got a good break in life, somebody else didn't. You know, when I got that job, it meant somebody else didn't get it. And so there are two sides to that coin. I mean, think about it. Maybe the laborers, we make all kinds of assumptions when we read this story. Maybe the laborers who came that day, in fact, at the end of the day, remember the laborer, the owner of the vineyard says to the people who were left at 5 o'clock, he says, "Why didn't you get the job sooner?" He said, "Nobody asked us." It's not that they weren't trying, nobody asked them. So we make assumptions about that. Maybe they were there. Maybe they were just too short. Have you ever been in line and bigger people crowded you out? You ever had that happen? Bigger people just crowded you out. They could jump higher, they waved, or man, God bless them with good looks. Well, there are just some people who stand out in the crowd and go, "Wow, I want that person to work for me." Woo! You know? Maybe they didn't appear strong enough to make it through the day, and so the person said, "Man, you don't have a prayer making it 14 hours, but you can do one." I don't know. What I do know is that a denarius, a silver coin, which is what the individual, the owner of the vineyard, promised to pay, a denarius is not a great amount of money. They are arguing and getting upset over a small amount of money. It's not a significant amount of money unless you're starving, because a denarius was enough money to get you through the day. That's it. That's all it was. It was enough simply to feed your family for the day, which meant if you didn't get picked that day, or if you got picked at noon or 5 o'clock and got paid proportionately, your family was only going to get enough of that proportion. And in any instance, you were going to be back in that marketplace seeking help the very next day. During the grape harvest, men used to want to work that way, so that's what they did. They were the day laborers of their time. And if they were really, really lucky, they would work the full 12 hours. Because if they weren't, their family would pay the price. So it's not like they were getting rich, they were simply getting by. Besides, at the end, when they complain, what's the owner of the vineyard say? He says, "You know what? What are you complaining about? You promised you'd work for a day for a silver coin, and what did I give you? I gave everybody what I promised. I fulfilled my part of the bargain, so what are you complaining about? You didn't get cheated. In fact, the only person who really got cheated here, if you want to get down to the nuts and bolts, was the owner of the vineyard. He's the only one. And the owner of the vineyard didn't have any problem. At the end of the day, the owner of the vineyard looks in the mirror and says, "You know what? I did what was right." That was the bottom line. He wasn't squabbling about anything else. I did what I can live with by faith. I did what was right. Which begged me, as I read and thought about this and what I might share, which begs us to ask, why is it that we get so upset when we think that somebody else got something or got a better deal than we did? Why is it that, we can get all the blessings in the world, and yet what we think about is that somebody else got something that they didn't deserve? I've got so many blessings in my life I didn't deserve, I can't even begin to count them. And yet, I fall victim to that thinking at times. Why is it that when we receive what the market can bear, it's okay? But when somebody else gets what the market can bear for their positions, then it's not fair. It's unjust, it's undue. Maybe it's fair by some written or unwritten rules, some sense of justice, but what I tell you is that fairness and equality are not dictated, they are only owned and lived. And it's all about doing what is right with what you have, period. It's a very personal decision. You can't legislate it, you can't mandate it. It is simply doing what is right because of who you believe you are and how God has shared grace and compassion with you. And whether we appreciate what we have and are generous in our abundance, or are we always dissatisfied and begrudging of others? That's really the question. It's a very simple parable, but it's a very challenging one because of where we go when we hear it. Now, most of you are aware of all the recent troubles in the National Football League, are we not? It's all over the news, all kinds of stuff. We've all heard about the Adrian Peterson thing and the Ray Rice thing and all that is going on. But how many of you here have heard about the LeSean McCoy situation? Anybody here? Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? LeSean McCoy is a player for the Philadelphia Eagles and a substantially paid player for the Philadelphia Eagles. Anyway, after a game a few weeks ago, he and some teammates went to celebrate their victory, a well-earned victory at a local restaurant, one of those local mom and pop places, been around forever, banners, Eagle banners hanging everywhere. This is a place that really supports the team. And he went in there and they were evidently loud and rowdy, which is probably understandable. They had a $65 bill, and when they left with the $65 bill, they gave the waiter a 20-cent tip. Well, the waiter was a little disconcerted, and when he said something, they said, well, you gave us lousy service, which he didn't think was the case. And, in this day and age, you better be careful what you do. The waiter took a picture of the receipt, including the tip, and put it on the internet. So it went viral. And of course, then the real argument begins. LeSean McCoy saying, well, I had lousy service, so that's how I let them know I had lousy service. The owner of the restaurant came on and said, look, I'm an Eagles fan. I don't want anybody taking this out on me. But I was right next to the booth. The waiter didn't give lousy service. And it's kind of interesting when you read all the blogs online of people responding to that receipt and what they said. My favorite one was someone said to LeSean McCoy, they said, well, you have some lousy games, and you still get paid the same. True story. I thought that one really jumped out at me. Now, having said this, I must make a confession that my wife is a much better tipper than I am. Probably, I suspect, because certainly early in her life and our marriage, she worked as a waitress. And I think if you've been on that end, you probably know how hard it is to be a waiter or waitress. Not that I would overlook the 10 or 20%, but my wife seems to not understand that, and sometimes hands me the receipt after she has filled out the tip, and she sees me kind of jump, and her response after evaluating not the service but the server is, it seems to me they could use it more than I could. A number of years back, I had a young man in my church at that time. His family for years had owned the ditto business. Anybody here, a teacher, use those ugly blue dittos? Yeah, those things were such a mess. They got ink all over you. And, when I taught high school, I didn't want to white it out. It took too long, so I just put a slash through the errors and ran it through anyway, right? Yeah. You ran all kinds of word searches and crossword puzzles on those. They were cheap. They were inexpensive, and it was before the age of photocopiers and home computers and printers and all the things now we take for granted. Anyway, he came into my office because he had a personal, really a faith issue for him. His family had made its money, a lot of money, on dittos, and they saw the wave of the future was not dittos. They were smart enough to see that this was coming to an end, and it was coming to an end quickly, but the public schools had not yet converted, and so in their business acumen, they bought all the dittos in the country. They bought them all. And they put them in a warehouse, and he came in and he said, our business plan is to sell those dittos to the public schools till they're no longer needed, and then we're shutting down this business because I'm not going to have to work for the rest of my life. Age 32, done. What's his dilemma? His dilemma was not that they'd been successful or they'd been good business people or they'd worked hard. His dilemma was, I am guaranteed security for the rest of my life because of this business that all those people we employed helped us to make. He said they don't know it, but in about 6 months, none of them were going to have jobs. And I wouldn't be where I am if they hadn't been where they have been. It was his dilemma. Pretty impressive, really, when you think about it at 32. And so what he did was they split up the company with the employees so that they got their fair share in his mind, and he got his fair share, and I can tell you that he didn't ever have to work another day in his life, and he retired at 32 to that beautiful home in Door County, the Cape Cod of Wisconsin. Okay? You see, the question here really that we are called to ask is, who are we in this parable? We may at different times be different people here. Jesus' story, that's the interesting thing about them. It makes them alive. At some point we're this person, at some point we might be this person, at another point we might be this one. But what I would throw out there is, are we those people who feel slighted? Do we see life as our glass being half empty? Having not received somehow what we perceive as our fair share. Somehow somebody out there owes me more. Or are we those who are grateful for what we have received, had the opportunity to do, been born in the right place, been lucky, maybe worked hard too? For the equality, that is, the equality that is practiced by Jesus, which we believe is an extension of God and a symbol of God's grace and God's love and God's compassion. And remember, the scriptures say that it rains, God makes it to rain on the just and the unjust. God is not discriminatory in that way. Equality is not necessarily about everyone having the same thing. It is about everyone being treated the same way, with love and compassion and a fair chance. When I'm standing at the end of the line in Publix and that new checker comes up and says, "Come over here," the last shall be first. And I didn't do anything to deserve it. In fact, most of the time, I don't even look very good. You see, this equality Jesus talks about is not because of where we come from, how we look, or because we were fortunate enough to be at the front of the line, but simply because we are radically equal in God's radical love. That's really where the word radical is. Radical love. The love that would live and die indiscriminately for any and all of us. And so the parable begs us to ask, at the end of the day, and you look in the mirror, can you say to yourself, I did what was equal and fair? Or did I do what was right? And make no mistake, there is a difference. Amen.